While my truck gets set up here for an uninstall of the LT kit that I had on this truck, I just wanted to point out that I do have a video showing the full disassembly of the stock suspension. I won't be doing that in this video, just wanted to point that out, and I'll be pointing out a few other things while this rolls in the background. First off, if you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you have the knowledge base and tools to complete this job, so don't start it if you don't. Second thing is if you're going to be disassembling your suspension and you're unhooking your steering rack, make sure that your steering rack is locked and centered, something I didn't do in this video. Also consider all the geometry changes that you're going to be doing once you install a lower or mid travel kit like this. May consider cutting or different wheels or different size tires. So keep all that in mind while you watch this, and if you got any questions, drop them in the comments below. What up, YouTube? Today we're going back to mid travel. As you can see here, just took off the LT kit off my truck. This is up for sale. A lot of interest so far, but no serious buyers. Kit includes coilovers, extended axles, uppers and lowers, and extended steering sleeves, and limit straps. Everything else, like the spindles and the uniballs, I'm going to keep that for my Heim Joint steering. So, but yeah, that's available. Now back to this. Let's open this guy up. So first up, we got the KP off-road cam bolts and plates. These plates come raw, so I'm gonna have to paint those guys so they don't rust up. All the hardware, obviously, and then your cam bolts. It's a nice kit. I was going between this and the 333 kit, but I think these ones allow you to put the bolts in front of the steering rack, so you don't have to pull off your steering rack anytime you have to do an alignment or maybe pulling off the lowers. So got that, and this gives you I believe these octagons or hexagons. Looks like octagons, so it probably gives you more positions available. Some of the other kits only are square, and it gives you like basically a positive and negative in a neutral position. So I just wanted that extra ability to adjust. Look at that. So this is what I really wanted to show you guys. I got these mid-travel lowers or stock length lowers, allow us to have some extended travel coilovers. Really nice boxed in lower. Wanted something stronger for some of the trails that we've been hitting, and also this allows you to run a little more caster, so you can push the ball joint forward, I think is what it is, and allow you to have a little more clearance on your wheels. Yeah, this is a really nice piece, and these guys are angled up right there to give you some more clearance when you're on the trails. So this together with the cam bolt kit is going to be a pretty nice setup. And just to give you a comparison, here's the new solo lower, and here's the total Chaos one that I just pulled off my truck. Pretty massive arm in comparison, but yeah, I think I saw in another video, one of the other guys I follow on YouTube, he weighed these out, and I guess this actually weighs the same amount as a stock Tundra lower. So that was a pretty interesting fact that he pointed out in his video. But yeah, so here's the total Chaos one, long travel, plus 3.5 width on each side. Here's the stock length one. So we got everything unboxed, bolts, the 2 arms, and we have 6 bushings that looks like they're equal length, 2 short ones, 2 sleeves, and 2 longer sleeves. So looks like we're gonna be ready to put all this together. I'm gonna go over the instructions real quick, make sure I'm putting these bushings in the right direction and whatnot, but there is a long side and a short side that's going to correspond to the lower control arm tabs on your frame. So I ended up actually going back to the video for the guy I mentioned earlier. His channel is GHB underscore the underscore IV, I believe. But he has a really nice truck. He's been building it out, and I've been watching it, and actually he's doing a lot of things that I'll probably be doing to my truck, so it's a good guide. But yeah, there's no solo motorsports instructions that I saw, so he's a good guide on this install for sure. The two longer bushings go on the fat side, and on the short side you have one longer bushing and one shorter bushing. So what he mentioned in his video is that towards the inside of the control arm you use the longer side, and on the outside you use the shorter side. For these bushings, we're not going to use any grease. You can just push them in by hand. For the sleeves, you want to grease this with some anti-seize and also the inside of the bushing so you can get it in there. And so I'm going to do that right now. My hand's getting dirty, and just force the rest of it in with the mallet. Started this with just a hammer and some grease, putting it in. After I was able to get it most of the way in, I just finished it up on my vise. I just put it between the vise and then just rolled it in until it was flush. So I got this one done. I'm gonna do the rest of them, and then we'll pick it up from there. All right, picking it up where we left off. Like I said, we're just gonna get all the sleeves in, and what I did was I hammered them in, but the bushing started coming out, so I just rolled it in with the vise right there. And then we got all the sleeves in. Now over here we got the tabs, got some paint, and then those are the steering sleeves. I ended up cutting them and retapping them. So those are also getting painted, getting ready to go for that. Next, let's focus on the upper control arm since we're waiting for all this to dry. So these are the arms from my my original setup. The ball joint in here was had a little play, so I had these both pressed out and replaced. So these guys are going to be good to put on the truck right now. So let's get to it. So like I mentioned, we're going to start with the upper control arm since everything else we can't put in until the paint dries. I'm going to put some anti-seize on this shaft right here, going into the Uniball, so it's easy to pull out later. All right, on this side we're going to start with the upper control arm. The band goes towards the outside because the coil bucket is this way. This is the front of the truck, and the upper control arm bolt is pretty easy on this side. It goes underneath the battery tray and pushed in, and then we're gonna have the nut on this side. All right, like I said, this side's pretty easy. Just push it through. Once you got this side in, it's pretty easy to get the washers aligned on this side. This is a 19 bolt and nut, and this guy I believe is torqued down to 97 foot-pounds. All right, the passenger side is a little more difficult. You gotta come in here, and there's a sensor. This guy right here with a bracket. It's got a 12mm bolt. It sits right here next to this hard line. You gotta remove that 12mm bolt so that you can kind of get past this. Right here where this tape is, that's where the bolt comes through. So you can pull this back a little bit to get the bolt out. If you need help tapping it back in, you can actually tap it in through this hole right here. You can see the bolt right back there. So one thing in my long travel video that I didn't notate or notated incorrectly was these top of the spindles. These guys sit in the top of your spindle and replace basically the entry for the bolt that goes through the upper control arm. That sits in with the C-clip. Mine already had them installed, but basically if you go to the spindle, this piece right here comes out, and this becomes the replacement. If you can see there, it has like that C-clip, and it sits right here. And I have new ones, but I'm not going to be using them because I have these guys installed already. While we're waiting for that last coat of paint to dry there, let's check these out. So I picked up these coilovers from AccuTune. See, AccuTune. It's in El Cajon here in San Diego, and they're custom tuned to my truck. What's cool about buying coilovers from AccuTune is that if you need to change the spring rate at some point, they'll do it for free. I'm not sure if the revalvings could do it for free, but at least the springs, if you need to swap them out, they'll do that. So yeah, these are brand new coilovers. Some Fox 2.5s. Let's check them out. All right, looks like the paint is dry. See, it came out really nice. I used this Raptor black enamel. I hit the sleeves with some bed liner, and then I used this enamel on top of it to give it a little gloss. But these are the steering sleeves that you'll see installed later. All right, we're getting ready to install the lowers. Important to note, you got a long bolt and a short bolt, obviously for your long side and your short side. 2 washers on each one and a nut. So let's get that in there. The cam tabs, or these cam plates, I'm going to put them in the neutral position. I've seen some other guys install it because I don't know how my tires or wheels are going to end up, and I'll let the alignment shop take care of that. All right, so we got front and rear are in a neutral position. Just snugged it up for now because we're not going to torque the cam bolts down until the weight is on the truck. So that's good to go. Next, we're going to move on to the Uniball on the lower control arm, and then afterward that's done, then we can put the spindle back on, or might throw on the coilover instead. I hit a bit of a snag yesterday, put everything on. I really wanted to get one side done so I can explain the other side well. And it looks like the top hat was put on the opposite direction when the revalving was done. So I'll show you what I did to kind of figure that out. But let's get started on the other side. I believe we just put the lower control arm, so let's pick it up from there. All right, so this is about where we left off yesterday. We're on the driver's side now, like I said. Kind of ran into a little bit of a snag, but anyway, pro tip, these tabs that come down from the frame where your lower control arms go take hits, and so a lot of times they'll be bent. So what you need to do is you need to take an adjustable wrench and just kind of bend them out so you have enough room to put the lower control arm. So that now that that's in, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna lower down the CV axle here so that we can work on getting the coilover in there. Now we have enough room to do that. So before we put the coilover in, here's where my woes were yesterday. On my old setup, I looked at pictures. The hose was facing towards the front of the truck. No big deal, right? When I was trying to put on the passenger side coilover, I noticed that the top of the bolt pattern there did not line up with the bolt pattern over there, and I had to unbolt it like 4 or 5 times to turn it to see if I could get it to sit right. But this hose was always hitting somewhere on the upper control arm. So what I found was that I made a little diagram like this, put it on top of the coilover like this to kind of see if I shifted the top hat to the other direction, if it would bolt up, and it did. So I think one important thing to note, you got a 9mm Allen bolt right there that you can remove this top hat and turn it in case you need to, but I definitely needed to do that on mine. And you can see on this side that I had to turn the top hat, and now the hose sits fine underneath the control arm. It has the clearance it needs. It's really close, but it clears. All right, so fortunately that was not the case on this side. The top hat was actually put on correctly. Just do your best to hold the coilover like this with your hand, and screw in one of the 14mm bolts, just enough to hold it in place, and then you can get the rest of those on. These are torqued down to 47 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to move on to putting the bottom of the coilover into the lower control arm. If you see that it's tweaked like this, all you got to do is turn it with a punch. In my case, I think these misalignment spacers actually have to be facing towards the rear of the vehicle, so I'm going to switch these out. You can just pull these off and then change them. Yeah, you shouldn't be in there that tight, and you should be able to pull them off with your fingers. So like I said, I'm going to switch positions here, put this towards the rear of the vehicle, and then try to get it lined up with the lower control arm right now. Alright, so what you might have to do is you might have to bring the lower control arm in or out to get this to line up with the misalignment spacers. If you're having some trouble, a good idea to have is a long screwdriver or a punch to kind of leverage it so that it'll line up with the holes. But once you got the bolt a little bit in here, a lot of people wouldn't do this, but I don't care that much. I hammered it with the rubber mallet all the way through, and I was able to get the bolt to seat. So this is torqued down to, I believe, 101 foot-pounds. We're good to go here. Already torqued the top, torqued the bottom. This guy's already torqued down as well. So we're just gonna mount this reservoir out of the way right now, and then we're gonna move on to the spindle. So the cool thing about these coilovers is Fox actually provides you with a mount for these 2000 to 2006 Tundras. There's 2 bolts underneath this. You can see them right here. I believe those are 19s. You pull this off and you put that bracket in between here like this, and then you use some hose clamps to hold the reservoir. So I was actually wrong about the bolts for the hook here. There's 17s and there's 2 of them, but like you see, the clamp comes right underneath, and then you use some hose clamps to hold the reservoir in place. These are 8 mils, and you just snug those up, make sure the hose is not kinked or has a bend in it. It's good to go. So now we can move on to the ball joint and the spindle. Well, it got dark on me, guys. So anyway, for you, you're gonna have a regular ball joint here. The castle nut underneath is gonna be torqued to 103 foot-pounds. I have a Uniball conversion. You gotta clean these up and lube it up. But yeah, once you got this in, then you can move on to putting on the spindle. All right, so for my Uniball conversion, I had to run Allen socket bolts like that. You should have, I think, 14 millimeter hex head bolts, and these are torqued down to 59 foot-pounds. If you need more room to get to these, I use an extension from the bottom here to get up to those. If not, what you could do is you could, if you're like me, you have your spindle gussets, and you can use a pry bar to move the spindle left to right, or you can possibly use something up here to move it left to right. This usually has like a hex head, so that'll help you kind of pivot the spindle so that you can get to the bolts and torque them down properly. All right, really important. One thing you want to do is make sure you get your axle or CV axle through the spindle so that you can have the axle nut on it. You just need to snug it up. You don't need to tighten it down right now, but do that before you put on your spindle and bolt it down, or else you're not going to have enough room and you're going to have to unbolt it again. So put it through, put the axle nut on, torque your lower ball joint bolts, and then from there you could put on your spindle to the upper control arm, and we'll bolt this down a little later. But let's move on to this. We're gonna now guide the bolt through the top of the spindle and get that snugged up. So something that can be quite difficult to do is get this bolt to line up with the hole for the spindle. If you can't line it up with just like a punch or something in here, what you can do is you get this bolt to sit at the top, and then hit the top of the bolt to get it angled properly to the top of the spindle, and then just kind of guide it through. You might have to tap it a couple times, but with a little effort, you can get that in there. All right, if you're running the Total Chaos spindles like I am, you're gonna have to use like an adjustable wrench. If you got a socket that fits in there, great. If not, just how you're gonna have to hold it. The bolt and the nut are torqued down to 100 foot-pounds, and this is a 28 millimeter bolt. All right, now that we got our spindle to our upper control arm torqued down, time to put the brake rotor back on and then the brake caliper onto the rotor. All right, so the 2 bolts back here that hold the brake caliper in place are 17mm bolts. Those are torqued down to 90 foot-pounds. Then what you could do is you could put a screwdriver here so that the actually back here, so that you can torque down this axle nut, and this axle nut's 103 foot-pounds. Okay, so now we got all this situated. I'm putting in my steering sleeve now. At this point you would be putting your tie rod in. A good thing to do is to measure how far away you were here for your tie rod, so that when you're putting it back together, shouldn't be an issue. If you had just disconnected your tie rod, then no big deal, you just connect it back up, you're good to go. But for me, I got the Heim joint that I got to put in, so I'm gonna go back to the same distance that I was, and then get that all torqued up. All right, once all that's good to go, then all you have left is your steering rack. If you've been paying attention to this video, I said that I have a pretty in-depth uninstall or removal of the stock suspension, so go check out that long travel install video for that. Other than that, I'm going to get underneath here, torque down this steering rack, and that should be the completion of our job. Okay, for the steering rack, you got a 19 bolt that comes in from the top here in the middle. You want to get that one seated down. I use this handy dandy Milwaukee hand wrench that was able to get in there and just get it snugged up before I torque it down. You're gonna need a 19 up here, 19 deep socket, and I believe this one's a 22, and there's a bolt that you have to hold at the back of this to get the nut snugged up. All right, so torque values here, you got a 97, a 96, 96, and I believe this one's a 120. All right, I got the steering rack all buttoned up. Now we got kind of an issue on my LT install. If you watch that video, I very specifically, when I was putting back the steering rack, made sure to center the steering rack and put that back in properly. Looks like I may have tweaked the steering a little bit when I was moving the rack around, so unfortunately it looks like I might have too much toe, or I may have turned the steering wheel a little bit too much so that this is pointing in. Not sure if it's going to correct itself when I drop down the wheels right now, but could be the case that I might have to get this towed to get it properly aligned. But just give you one last look at the install here before I put the wheels back on, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. All right, back at it again. So as you saw in the last portion of the video, I had a pretty bad toe issue. So what I ended up doing was I ended up reeling in the Heim joint here, and that kind of corrected the wheel direction for the most part. However, now I have the same issue on this side, so I'm going to reel in the Heim joint here as well. One other critical step I did not do is I did adjust the height of my coilovers, so it could be the case that I have to pull them off right now. It's probably going to be the best case scenario, just because if I try to compress a spring here and then try to turn it, could not be compressed properly, or I could damage the threads. So I'll try that right now, but for the most part I think I'm just gonna have to pull them off. So I just completed another video showing how to adjust the preload on 2.5 Fox coilovers. As you can see, got the height adjusted. I haven't moved it just yet, but the height looks pretty good now. It's about 2.5 inches, 2.5, 3, almost 3 inches of lift in the front. That's 1.25 inch preload on the actual coilovers. Fixed my toe issue for the most part by reeling in the Heim joint. So now I'm gonna be able to just take this out to the truck shop and have it aligned, and that should be completing our portion of install for the solo lowers, and Fox 2.5 coilovers. Back to mid-travel. All right, if you made it this far in the video, appreciate you guys. Seems a lot of you have been liking the content, so please like and subscribe to the channel. Helps me keep motivated to keep making some of this content for everybody. Couple of final thoughts and major things to point out for this install. If you're going to be disconnecting your steering rack, definitely make sure that it's locked or centered before you bolt it back in. I had a really tough time getting everything to line up properly. Ended up having to tow my vehicle, so I don't want that to happen to anybody. So yeah, make sure that if you do unhook your steering rack that it's locked or centered, and then you're going to be able to line it up just enough so you can get to the shop. So that's one thing to point out. Second thing to point out is the install instructions for Fox coilovers call for the reservoir to be mounted down here. So kind of a dangerous spot to be mounted, so I'm going to be relocating that into my engine bay. I just have it zip tied to some holes that I had in the fender right there, but I'll be bolting it somewhere else. Did a trail recently and it would have totally damaged those reservoirs. I think the third thing to definitely point out about this install is the geometry of changes that occur when you have the slower control arms. It does push your wheel forward about an inch, but also you should consider the clearance back towards your frame and towards the front. I actually ended up cutting a lot of this portion out here and then ended up finding that I was rubbing all through here, so I'll probably have to cut the fender here all the way through and then relocate this bolt to here. So that's not something that you want to do to your truck, then I would really reconsider that, or get some different size tires or a different offset. But then again, you have to also consider being able to clear your coilover and your spindle and your upper control arm. So a lot of things to consider, not just throwing these lowers on. You got to make sure that it's something that you really want to do. The other thing too is that I'm going to be installing some bead locks with a different offset that's going to help me clear everything up here. So easy choice for me, but just something to consider. But other than that, took it on a Holcomb Creek recently, and man, that was a good run, and mid-travel kid the perfect. So I'm really happy that I went back to mid-travel on this truck. So thanks for watching.